All righty, and welcome to another Data and API show. I am super excited to have Rishabh with us today. Did I say that even close to correct?
It's Rishabh.
Rishabh.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's better. Yeah,
So what I can say correctly is super tokens.
yeah.
And Rishabh is with Super Tokens, a company that reached out to us saying, "Hey, we think that we have like some natural synergy here between our two products," and was super excited to have you come join us today. So, why don't you let the audience know who you are, kind of your background a little bit, and then kind of a little bit about what Super Tokens is, what it does, and we'll dig right into the good stuff.
Sure. So, I'm thank you so much for the the intro, Jesse. And is Jesse the correct way of saying your name?
Jesse is the right way to say it. Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, I'm the co-founder and CTO at Supertokens, and we are building open source authentication. So similar to services like Auth0 or Firebase Auth or AWS Cognito, but in a more developer-friendly open source way. Uh, there are a couple of other differences between the other services and ours that kind of make it super easy to customize the auth logic based on your requirements, and that's kind of why we are more developer friendly. And I can, like, during the session, I guess we get into a little bit of architecture diagram, and I can show you how that works there. And we've been like working on this since 2019. And we sort of started off with just session management as a focus. So nothing to do with authentication there. It was just like the post authentication part, which is how do we sort of manage access and refresh tokens. And it's sort of the motivation behind all of that is that there's no consensus online on what the best ways of session management is. Like, some people recommend you use local storage, some people recommend you use cookies, some people are like, are JWT is good for sessions or are they not? And there are many such questions that people keep having. Um, so that's kind of what we started off with, and then we got into YC because of that. I'm guessing, and in there, we, after speaking to like hundreds of companies in our batch, we sort of realized that authentication is still a pain point, even though we have such big solutions in the space. It still sucks to be using one of these because they're just not developer friendly enough or customizable enough. So that's kind of where we come in.
Yeah, and if you, I'm located in Europe, and
Yeah.
the SaaS first approach to Auth is also a lot of times a blocker for a lot of companies. They want to have that awesome DX that we're kind of all accustomed to now, but they don't want to basically, like, or they can't put all that data in my hometown, Seattle, or wherever else. And so there's a lot of cases where a SaaS first approach doesn't work. I mean, we see that with Hasura all the time. We see companies that love the product and they can't use a cloud version just yet for whatever regulatory reasons, and something I'm sure you've seen as well. So
Yeah, like a lot of our users, in fact, come to us because we're self-hosted. So we have two ways of using super tokens. One is a managed service, and one is self-hosted. So for people who are under like regulation, and they want to make sure the data doesn't leave the EU or wherever they're required to be, they prefer using our self-hosted version, right? So in that, you kind of get to control, you get to use your own database wherever that is located, and host the super tokens core yourself. And there's nothing that leaves your infrastructure. Like, we don't really, it's completely air gapped. So yeah, that works out.
yeah, fantastic. Well, let's just have a look at what Super Tokens does. You said that you have a demo for us to have a
Yeah,
look at.
yeah.
So yeah,
Sorry, this is more of a demo of like how it works with Hasura. And
practical.
do you want me to, should I show it you right now?
Yeah, let's just dig in right at it and have a look, and we'll kind of take the questions as they come. We have one person in chat saying that I guess your swag game is on point. They had some stickers landed in their mailbox just recently, so very
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. We started making t-shirts and stickers and different type of like merchandise really recently. Yeah, so it's good. Great. So I'm just going to start by sharing my screen now. Cool. Is my screen visible?
I had to put it on there. I just need to block a spammer here real quick. All right, there we go.
Okay, awesome. Great. So so this basically the demo is about working with Supertokens for authentication and Hasura for your backend, or at least part of your backend, depending on how you're using Hasura. So typically you have like different parts for your app, right? You have a front end, which could be like a mobile app or React or Angular, any sort of technology there, and you have an API layer, which it could be Node.js, Golang, Python, whatever you want. Your database, again, it could be MySQL, NoSQL, really anything. And you have Hasura, right? Has the Hasura cloud, which is sort of acts like a GraphQL layer on top of your database, and your front end can sort of query your database through the Hasura cloud, right? And that's let's assume that that's like a typical setup for somebody using Hasura. And to this, we want to add authentication. So the way we do that is, from an architecture point of view, we add like this module here, which is the Supertokens core. This is something that you can self-host, or you can use a managed service for. If you use a managed service for this, the database that is underlying this is also controlled by us at the moment. But if you self-hosted, you can connect it to your own database. The next thing is we have SDKs for front end and back end layers. So the front end SDK displays the UI for logging in. So depending on what login method you want, we have like social login, email password login, passwordless at the moment, and we will come up with new login features pretty soon. And then we have a backend SDK, which sort of exposes a bunch of APIs, which the front end can call. And those APIs also talk to the core for storing information in the database. So this is sort of different than other auth providers, where the front end talks directly to the auth provider. Here it's sort of going through your API layer and then talking to Supertokens. The advantage of this is that if you want to customize any of the APIs that we expose for sign in, sign up, sign out, etc., you can sort of do that within your own API layer, and it's pretty powerful the way you can customize them, and that sort of makes it more flexible and developer friendly. The other advantage is that we can sort of leverage. So from a security point of view, we can leverage HTTP only cookie sessions, to give you like session management out of the box, right? So normally when you're using another service, they sort of take you through the OAuth flow and issue you an ID token, which then you have to use to create your own session, and they kind of leave the session management part to you to figure out. And a lot of people like mess up that from a security point of view, because of our architecture, where we sort of sit in your API layer as well. We can handle the sessions part for you as well, right? So after logging in, your front end and API layer are connected through like this HTTP only cookie based session. And we also issue a JWT, which you can then send to other services like Hasura, and get like your GraphQL working here. So it's kind of what I'm going to be demoing here in this session. I mean, is there any sort of clarity? Do you think you have any questions?
I think that's pretty straightforward. So I mean, whiteboards are clear. So let's have a look at the actual code, because that's where
Awesome. Yeah. So this
we
is kind of
we all get lost.
the finished. This is like the finished demo, right? Where you
All
see
right.
this login screen. I'm just going to quickly log in, and um, we have a session. So basically, right now, I have a session between my front end and my API layer. And when I click on call API, it's gonna communicate with Hasura Cloud to access some database which has some information about the currently logged in user and display that on the screen, right? So when I click here, it sort of displays this from the database using Hasura, right? And then of course I can sign out, and sign up and stuff like that. So this is like what I'm gonna showcase in terms of like the code here. So let's start with like the front end part. So this is like and by the way, this code is sort of available on our GitHub. It's it's over here. Supertokens or React. You can go to examples, and we have like a bunch here. So with Hasura and social login and email password login. So that's basically the code that I'll be showing. Um, so diving in, right? So this is a pretty simple React app in the source folder, and we have an API server in API server.js, which is open right here. This is an Express Node.js app, and I mean Express Node.js server, and the app.js is a React app.
Do you
So
mind bumping your font size just a little bit and maybe collapsing your sidebar just for a little bit so we can kind of
oh yeah,
see
sure. Is this
the
right?
walkthrough just a little bit? Yeah, it looks better. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, this is the React. This is sort of the initialization of the React app. What we want to do essentially is we want to call like the init function on Supertokens, and we are for this demo we are using social login and email password with GitHub, Google, and Apple. So and we want email verification, but this can be turned off. And we also want sessions, right? So this session will sort of like um, will sort of work like initialize the way your front end and API layer talk. So what this code here is going to do is
Now, sorry, when you're saying when you're initially initting a session, you're referring to like a browser session as opposed to a database session, right?
yeah, exactly, the session between your browser and your API layer, right?
Yeah.
So
Because
what?
Next.auth has sessions built into it as a concept, but they're a very different kind of session. That's not a JWT. That's a direct transaction based session against your database. So I just
Yeah,
wanted to make sure that there wasn't a confusion there for any viewers that we're
yeah,
talking about. You're referring to a session as in the actual user's session on the browser itself. Yeah.
exactly. Right. So what this is going to end up doing is showing a UI like this in the /auth route, which is of course configurable, and you can also embed this in any page or customize the UI here. But this is kind of the default, right? And on the backend side, we have something very similar. We also want to do like supertokens.init, and I'll come to what this is pretty soon. But we want to also do like third-party email password in it. Here I provide like the credentials for Google, GitHub, Apple. These are like demo credentials, so it's okay to sort of broadcast them. And I also do sessions on init here, right? Now the thing here is by default we don't have JWTs for sessions because if your app setup doesn't really include any third-party service, if it's just your front end and back end, a normal HTTP only cookie-based session works just fine. Like you don't need a JWT for this to communicate with this, right? But because we are integrating with Hasura, we want to issue a JWT as well, which we can send to Hasura. Now, Hasura sort of requires custom claims inside the JWTs, which help it, which like sort of help it authorize the user when you're querying on behalf of a user. So I'm going to come to that real quick, but like essentially we add custom claims to a JWT in this way. And we can sort of, as you can see, this is like any sort of JSON, so you can add anything you want to the JWT. So we're just adding Hasura base claims here for Hasura to understand. Um, so when I log in, basically, so if I go back to the app, and right now, if I see that, let's check out the cookies. There aren't really any. There's no access or refresh or any of these tokens here because I'm logged out. Let me try and log in. So now as I do that, I see like the access token, and there's also a refresh token and stuff, but that's on a different path, so that's sort of hidden from this view. But this access token essentially allows me to query my API layer, and I can also fetch the JWT from the session on the front end to send to Hasura. So if I go to like the logic for querying the API, which is sort of here inside the React app. Like essentially, when I click on the call API button, this function gets triggered. Let's sort of print out the JWT, right? And I'm just going to comment this out for now. All right.
Just while you're getting there, just adding that Hasura does also accept cookie-based auth. You have to configure it so it doesn't have to be a JWT, but it could be a cookie-based auth as well. So the cookie that you're getting back from the API, you could also pass forward onto the onto Hasura. Yeah.
So that's possible, and I'll come to that. I'll come to that as well, like the kind of way to do that pretty soon.
I'm just adding that for the chat to be able to.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So
it's all good. Just adding context.
Yeah. So this is the JWT that we issued that you want to send to Hasura. So if I go to jwt.io, and you can just quickly inspect what this looks like. Oh yeah. So we can see that it has the user ID of the currently logged in user. It has these Hasura claims, which we added on the backend over here in the API server. And it has like a couple of other things like the issuer. So the issuer here is essentially my API server, and it's sort of hosted on this URL. And this is the expiration and issue at time and stuff like that. Pretty standard JWT stuff, right? So this goes to Hasura. Now on Hasura side, what happens is that once it receives this JWT, it needs to essentially verify it. And the way it's going to verify it is by querying the issuer and asking for the public keys for the JWT and verifying it through that. So if you go to the Hasura dashboard, like if you have a project and there's the settings section, environment variables, you can sort of configure the URL where Hasura should query to get the public keys for the JWT. So since my backend is hosted over here, I'm going to put that in, followed by this path for to actually get the keys, the public keys. Once I sort of set this, and I can then send my JWT to Hasura, and it will verify it successfully.
And that path there, that's going to your Express server that you set up then?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And then ngrok is exposing your Express server to Hasura Cloud, just for people who are tracking along that. Okay, great. Yeah, that's a nice approach. I can see how that definitely, for a self-hosted solution, that definitely removes a lot of the headache right there, is by having the JWK URL.
Yeah.
It's J. I forget what the J is, but it's well known something, right? It's J is what does the J stand for?
That's a good question. I don't really know what the J stands
for. I think it's well known as the W and the K.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to Google it. Yeah. So basically, this is where my API server is, and this endpoint is sort of exposed by our SDK. So if you look at the API server code, we have this thing where the app is using the middleware, and this middleware is essentially from our library, and this exposes all the APIs which sort of are required for the app to work. So for example, when I click on sign out, or when I click on sign up or sign in, it's hitting this middleware, and this middleware is having the logic for the APIs and stuff. So just similarly, when Hasura queries this, this path here is sort of captured and managed by the middleware function over here.
Just to answer a couple of the questions and from a person who had asked in the chat. So basically, when you've got you make the request to sign in, you've got one request to your API, which initiates the JWT and stores that locally inside the browser. And then any subsequent request is passing that JWT to Hasura as a secondary request, but that's all inside of one those are two separate operations, because they'd asked how many times does the API get called, but it's basically for each auth and log out session, right? So it's not for once you've signed in, you're authed until that JWT expires, and then it
until the access token expires of like
Mhm.
basically until this session expires, you're logged in, right?
Mhm.
Between your front end and your API layer. So after the after Hasura sort of verifies the token through this endpoint, we need to set so I've deployed a database for my app, and it's a pretty simple database. It's just this user info, which contains just 2 columns, this email and name. And right now, what we want to do is we just want to match. We want to return the rows where the email matches the user's email. Email in the database matches the user's email in the JWT.
In the JWT.
Yeah. So we go to the permissions section and we create this new role called user. This could be called whatever you want. And if you notice, we add like in when we are setting the custom claims, we set the role here for Hasura to sort of know which role they're talking about. And then we have like some checks here where like the email in the database, the email column should be equal to the X user ID claim in the JWT. And that's kind of where we set this here in the JWT. So one thing you might notice is we set this to the user's email, and this user info is got from Supertokens, because once the user signs in or signs up, we have the email, and when we're creating a session for them, we want to get the email from the user ID and just put that email inside the Hasura claims, right? And based on that, then Hasura would filter the database to just give me the rows that belong to this email ID. And in this case, it's just one row with my name and my email.
So that begs the natural question then. So what's the bridge between for a sign up, for example, what's the bridge between Supertokens and Hasura so that we have a mapping between the two users?
Right. So right now it's just the email ID that it's being used. But is your question about like how is the JWT sent to Hasura, or is your question
how does the user information get added to Hasura in the first place?
all right, that I mean you can add like you can connect it to your database. So you can already have the information from there before. You can create an API where the information is added. Like post sign up, we have like post sign up callbacks where you can get the user information and put it in your database, and then Hasura will be able to like query that because you connected Hasura to your database.
Yeah, because you would need that, right? You would need to have the some kind of a glue to keep Supertokens memory of a user with what Hasura has in there to match those IDs. So then you'd have on sign up, I've got a successful user inside of Supertokens, and on that callback, then I could just write a mutation right into Hasura from there with that successful payload. So I know that I have the two bits of data connected, because otherwise,
exactly.
So from the Auth0 flow, it's usually via webhook. From here, you could use the callback.
Exactly. So the way you would do it here is, so we have this features called override, which allows, it's sort of like inheritance, where you can like override any of the existing default functionality to have like custom logic, and then also call like the original implement or like the super implementation when you need to. So for example, if you want to override the sign up logic here to add stuff to Hasura, you would like you can sort of create the override object here, and then you can override one of the APIs that this we call these recipes. So like one recipe, you can override the sign up API this way. So
because you could potentially write a recipe that would essentially even just use Hasura as your auth system, right? Because you've got if you have the ability to store an email and a password in there, you could essentially have a little boilerplate inside of this override here that does the check but you could basically have a recipe that would even just go to Hasura, right?
Yeah, totally. So that's completely possible. Yeah. So so for example, we want to override the sign up API, which this recipe exposes. So when I click on, let's just sign out quickly. When I click on when I fill this in and click on sign up, this is the API that's called. And you have the input, right, which is you'll have the user's email and password over here. And you can call the original implementation of this. So email password sign up with the same input. And here you can sort of see if it was successful or if the email already existed. So if it is successful, right, we can do like if response status is okay. Then you can get the user information here. So response dot user, and this sort of contains their ID and the email, and like if they use like social login, then what login details are, and then you can post this information into your database or into Hasura and have the data saved there, right?
Yeah.
And then when you're creating session, which is happening sort of within the sign up process, it's going to take the user information, put the email in here, and then create the JWT based on that, which can then get sent to Hasura. So yeah.
That's really great. Yeah.
Yeah, and then finally to sign in. So finally, to sort of finish the rest of the explanation is, oh yeah, I think I spoke about the permissions thing already, right? Where we have this this thing here where we're doing this equal to. Yeah, so that's the demo. But there's one more part, which is when you click on the button for call API, I just printed out the JWT here. But what we want to do is query Hasura, right? So there's a bunch of ways to querying Hasura. This is like one way of doing it, where I can send an Axios request with the JWT as an authorization token. And this is my GraphQL query, right? I can also use a Polo GraphQL client to sort of do this. But I just kept it simple here for demoing. So yeah, that's basically how this works. This is and this is like one of the ways of doing this. The problem in this way from a security point of view is, before I get into that, is there any other question that anybody has?
Let's see what the chat says here. So the one question was, is it the developer responsibility to pass the JWT in the header, or Supertokens will add it to the header automatically? I think he just showed that. So this is the developer's responsibility to make this call. Yep. So you've got the JWT and you pass it on in the header there. And then user information stays only in Supertokens database. So that's going to be a kind of a question of which data you want to store where. Generally speaking, for the auth provider, you'll want to store a minimal payload in terms of kind of everything needed for identity.
Yep.
And then you would store your application specific data with your app. So in the Hasura side, yeah.
Yep.
Cool. So you were saying about security, and then once you answer the security question, I want to see if we could potentially even lean up this API a little bit, because there might even be some interesting features from the Hasura side that could even make this even leaner. But we'll have why don't you mention the security issues, and then we'll see if we can do some hacking.
Yeah. So the security issue with this is you're exposing the JWT to the front end, right? Because this is like app code running on the front end, and you're able to sort of like read the JWT. So this opens you up to like theft of this JWT via XSS, essentially. So somebody could like put malicious JavaScript on your front end and ship this JWT off somewhere else, and then they could use that JWT to query Hasura, and it would work. So the way you would prevent that is, well, by not exposing the JWT to the front end. And the way that's normally done is through cookies, specifically HTTP only cookies. So those are only accessible on the server side and not on the front end side. This then means that, so, this depends on the domain that you have for for Hasura and for your API layer. If your API layer is, api.example.com and Hasura is, cloud.hasura.com, then you can't share cookies across the two domains. They're completely different domains. But if you have like a reverse proxy of some sorts, where you can like add a custom domain here, like for example, hasura.example.com, and then send that off to the Hasura cloud. Then you can you can store this JWT in cookies against the your domain, and then send that to Hasura instead, without actually, exposing it to the front end. So that's one point from a security point of view, which could be really useful for people.
Yeah, totally. So have you tried having a look? Can you show the code part where we're calling the login API?
Yeah, so that's kind of hidden through our React UI.
So this is the SDK. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So in our SDK, we have this function which renders the login UI on the /auth route. So as you can see, this is the router, and this catches all /auth routes. And because the UI is in there, the API is call happening within the UI itself. But we do have like the ability for you to add pre-API hooks, so you can sort of, so there's a pre-API hook, and what is the type of this thing? And like you can modify the request however you like. So if it's like, sign. Huh. So yeah, signing up. So you can access the fetch request and the URL and modify it and return that, and that'll go to the backend instead of the default stuff.
So we had a question from one person asking how the support for Next.js is, and it's probably very good, right? Because you can just pop this into a page, and in terms of hacking into the router mechanism, it's just watching for the specific path, right?
Yeah. So we have like dedicated guide for Next.js over here. A couple of differences when it comes to server-side rendering. Like for example, you might want to do session verification on like in the get server-side props function, and that gets a little bit tricky, especially when it comes to session refreshing. So like we have guides for all of that over here. Like it might be a little bit. I don't really have a demo right now to show for this, but there's a dedicated guide for it.
Nice. So does the Express server you set up, or we can even switch to using a demo with your hosted product too. Does that expose an API of its own, like a login or a sign up endpoint?
Yeah, so that's the thing. We don't do that. So if you do if you
at all, okay.
Yeah, if you use a managed service, we're just going to manage this part for you, like the database and the core for you. The API is still something that you have to do. And the reason for that is because if we were to like put the API as part of the managed service, like let's say we pick Node for the language for this, right? If you're developing an app that does not have a Node developer or like a Node backend, if you want to make any sort of customizations to this API, like through these override features, you're going to be forced to use Node as a language, which can really suck because you may not be familiar with it. So instead, what we do is we build SDKs for different languages, so you can sort of infuse that layer into your API within the language that you already know, and then making customization is much simpler.
Okay, yeah, because I'm wondering if we can potentially try to, in the time we have left here, is maybe hack in a custom action handler on the Hasura API that would then call the managed core service through some sort of middleware, and essentially obscure away both the login and the logout behavior, so that we can ultimately just use the Hasura API to do log in, log out, and then also the querying of the data, and not have to ship two APIs to the client, which if we play the cards correctly would potentially open up the ability to even do cookie-based auth, because if we're passing it through a proxy of Hasura's API, then we can set the cookie on the. Do you think
Hasura
that's worth giving a shot, or?
So I'm not like very familiar with Hasura entirely, like as the different features. So what that would entail is basically like creating like does it have like functions, Lambda functions that can run?
Essentially, so if we start with getting an endpoint somewhere behind an ngrok API, where we could essentially call, let's like make it just a vanilla express server that would then expose two endpoints, login and sign up, for example. We can have and then use that endpoint to call the core service to do our login and our sign up behavior. How straightforward is that?
Where would those endpoints be? Because
we would stand up our own Express server, just a standalone Express server.
Right. So I have a standalone Express over here, and like exposes the sign up, sign in, log out, all of those APIs, which are behind ngrok.
So potentially we could just call that URL with the /login and /logout routes, or
yeah, that's exactly what's. So if I
let's give it a shot. Let's go to your Hasura project.
Sorry. Okay, I'm on the Hasura project.
And let's go to actions. And maybe we even want to attempt this with a like a postman or something, just to see if we can totally abstract away our thinking of how this would work. Do you have access to like a postman tool?
Oh, yeah.
Let's just try to create a sign up with my credentials just to see if it works.
Well, it's starting up. So
we can start walking through this the UI while Postman's booting up. Let's say it's firing up. I don't know why Postman always just like wants your whole screen. It's just like I'm here. Clearly you have no other intentions right now than to use my interface. Yeah. We can go ahead and hit create on the action there. And what we will do is we'll define this is just a description there, but down below what we'll do is we'll define the name of the action inside of this mutation. So we could call where it says action name, we call this something like sign up or login. Yeah, either is fine.
Yeah.
And then we'll give it the input that it needs. So what inputs does the endpoint need for sign up? Or for login, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we'll just stick with login for now with the time we have. We'll try to see if we can authenticate your existing user.
I'm just trying to like sort of make sense of what we're trying to do here. So does this run in like a Express, like a node environment?
So if you see down below where it has webhook HTTPS handler, we can provide the endpoint for your ngrok API there for the login handler there. And then we're able to pass in the requests to go and actually execute against the login endpoint that you have running in Express.
Okay, so basically
you're
call this API, which will then call the ngrok login API. Is that kind of what?
Yeah. So we could use the Hasura API to then do a login mutation, passing in the inputs of username and password, and then it will actually proxy through to your Express server and give you the login behavior.
I see. Okay, I'm trying to think that if we can define, like, can we somehow use the middleware that
that's what I wanted to test. I wanted to test Postman to see if we could just get it abstracted down to just a post request, just to prove that we have our connection in place. And then once we have it working in Postman, we can easily port it over to Hasura.
So the login request, let's sort of inspect that.
Yeah, that's also possible, just to inspect it.
So right
So
now
what's happening?
Right now it's querying my local espresso.
Okay. Yep.
And that's the thing. And well,
That's the response you're getting back. Yeah.
these are the cookies, yeah. And request header contains the this custom field called RID, which sort of helps us know which recipe to route the request to. So that's something that the request here, the request here would get, and the body is, well, it's basically this, right? So the form fields and the password.
So it's needing so it's actually receiving a form field object as the. Okay, so we can map all of that, and then it's ID and password was the name of the input.
Yeah. ID, email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we're going to attempt to do what's called a request transform here. If you go back to Hasura, so if we're going to go ahead and underneath the sample input, let's rename sample input to whatever makes sense for us, login input or something.
Okay.
Yep. And then we can use ID and password. Those were the fields, right? Or
well, it's an object. It's an array.
Value. Okay.
Yeah, the array contains.
Oh, it's, okay. It's taking an array of key, basically.
Yeah.
So we'll need then to pass in an array. So we'll need ID value as the, well, what we'll do is that's not a valid syntax for a GraphQL type. What we'll do is we'll use brackets, and then we'll just do ID string value string with a colon, separating the key value mappings.
Yeah.
And then up underneath where we have the arg1, up where the mutation definition is.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and call this the login. We'll just call it login there. And then we'll do an array. Here we'll do the array of the login input. So we can, yeah, exactly. So we can delete that there.
Delete what?
Now we could clean this. We could actually clean this up a little bit. Does it ever take more payload values for ID value, or is it basically always ID and password?
So it can take more depending on your sign up. So the login one will always take ID and password. The sign up stuff can take more if like you got some metadata, like the name and stuff, whatever the user might.
Well, we can go ahead and do this. So we're going to move login input inside of the array there.
Sorry, login. Can you just repeat that?
Well, yeah, we'll move on line 7. We'll move the login input word you wrote. We'll move that inside of the array brackets. That like we just had there a moment ago.
That
right
way?
There, yeah. And then we'll delete the one that's afterwards. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And there should be capital L, right?
Yeah. So let's rename the input there you have next to login on line 7, so we're not duplicating type names. Let's just go ahead and call that input for now. And we'll just kind of leave it like that. Now what we're going to do is the response you get from the server. Can we look back at your inspect and see what the server response was?
So response
on the response,
status okay.
And then the user object.
Yeah.
So if we can copy that JSON object.
Sure.
And it's also getting like a header, like it's also getting a cookie, right?
Yeah, it's getting like a bunch of things. Where is there it is. So response, it's getting like this header, it's getting set cookie header, It's getting this header and it's getting set cookie header,
Okay.
which all this. Yeah.
We're gonna try, see how far we get here. So what we're gonna do is we're going to why don't you open up a tool called transform.tools. I think it's actually the name of the website is transform.tools. Just a website. Transform.tools, singular. And then tools is plural. Yeah. We're going to go to on the JSON sidebar there, we're going to go JSON to GraphQL.
Okay.
And we'll paste in the JSON that we copied from the server response there. And you'll see on the right-hand side, it converted that to GraphQL types for us.
Nice.
So we'll copy that whole typings there.
Is this not use any sort of weird? Okay.
Yeah, it's what it does is the root.
Got it.
And then we'll go back over to Hasura and we'll paste that in down by like from lines 1 through 3. We'll just replace sample output. We'll replace that whole typing there, and just paste our new one. And let's rename that one to something nicer, to something like login output or something. And then we can replace, exactly. So now we've basically mapped our inputs and our outputs to GraphQL typings. So let's go down now to our webhook handler, and we're going to paste in the URL that we have from the ngrok that you've got.
Let's go.
And then we'll just need the endpoint on that for the login. Yeah.
All right.
I think it's just login, right?
Yeah. No.
Oh, sign in. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. And so what we're going to do now, we'll leave it as synchronous. Asynchronous would return back sort of like a task ID that you could check the status on. So we're going to tell it to forward client headers to webhook. It's not going to be super important in this case, but that's what we could do. And you said that you have that one special ID that needs to be forwarded on, right? There was some sort of ID.
Our ID, yeah.
And then we can just paste in the value that we need to.
Oh, but isn't that sort of like, is there no way of like proxying the headers as is from like the source to the destination?
Yes. So we could potentially be able to grab that from the header if we were requesting that from the actual. Let's hard code it for now. We'll see if we can make it dynamic here, depending on the timing that how far we get. Exactly. Then if we go to the, we're going to say configure add request option transformation. Yeah. And so here, what we're going to do is we're going to make this be a, is it a post request or is it a get request? Post. And so now what we're going to do is modify the payload transformation. And here we're going to modify the body that we're getting. So let's paste in up where we have input. We're going to paste in the JSON example for our if you go down to the request here. So we're going to pretend like we're querying this in the
right. So you want me to go and like that's basically what you want, right?
Yeah. Because we're gonna pass in just the we're gonna just pass in that in the go ahead and undo up by the sample input there in step 1. Sorry, go down. There was a different step 1. Sample input inside of the input bracket there. Inside of the input, we're going to go ahead and paste in what we just copied there, and we're going to remove form fields. We're just going to take in the array. So.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to delete up to. One more level up, and then we should have it there. So it's going to be I believe we even delete the opening bracket there on line 5. I think it's just the array that we're passing in, if I remember correctly from our typings. From our sample input. Yeah, sample input's just taking an array directly. So now what we can do is attempt to map this now to what we're expecting. So here, let's go ahead and paste in just below, after line 6, let's paste in what we had copied previously, the shape of what we're looking for. And we're going to snag from our body input.
Okay.
We're going to grab body input, and we're just going to go ahead and leave out arg1. Yep. We're going to just actually replace that right after form fields. So from line 9, we're going to delete that whole array there, all the way down to the end of that array. And it's going to be literally just that curly Q. And we're going to, and so in this case, I've told you something stupid, but it's going to be input.input because input is what it comes in as from the request. And then we can delete lines 1 through 6 there.
Yeah.
So let's see here. Type error expected object starts line 2.
That seems about right.
It could be. So it expects objects. Let's try to save it, see if it'll let us save it, and then we can have a look to see what it's complaining about.
So create action.
Yeah. Because the type user of the field user is the object type login input.
Login output.
So user of the field user in the object type login output is object type, which isn't allowed. So if we go back up to the oh, I know what the problem is. The problem is that this feature is releasing tomorrow. So what we're going to do is we're going to flatten. We're going to go up to go up to where we have user on line 9.
Yeah.
And we're going to make that be type JSONB.
Sorry, type.
Actually, it's just JSONB. Yeah.
JSONB.
Yeah. And we can just leave it like that. We can delete the user type that we have defined.
I see.
Do you have a Postgres database connected to this, right?
I don't.
You don't. Okay, so we're going to need to define.
I think I do.
You do. Okay, because then it has JSONB part of its type definition. So we can go ahead. We'll have to scroll down to see if it actually has a problem with JSONB or not as the type, but we'll have a look at see if it complains or not. So it says that it was happy with it. So what we can try now is if we go ahead and attempt to log in now from our API Explorer. Actually, back to Hasura over an API. We can try a mutation now.
Okay.
So inside of the Graphical Explorer.
All right.
And we can try mutation.
Yep.
Yeah, and then open the curly cues. And then we'll do login. And then inside of login, we'll do parentheses. It's actually, it needs an input type. So we're going to do the parentheses around it. So it's like calling a function. And then we'll do input. Yeah. And then it's an array. So colon array, because it's like JSON now that we're pasting in kind of the actual, so input colon array. The actual brackets.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. And then we do the mapping here, right? We do the input types from our. Now we do the squirrely brackets for whatever it is we pasted in before for.
The form field stuff, like this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So just that array we could paste right in there.
Okay.
Except for minus the form fields. Yeah.
Yeah. So the contents of the array, right? Basically,
Yeah.
stuff. Okay.
And then we have to return. We have to after line 5. To define our return value. So we do the squirrely brackets.
That's that.
Yeah. And then we go ahead and check for our return type. So just do control space bar or something to see what our options are. So we have the user that we can return there, or status to. And from there, we can try that to see if it works.
Okay. Let's give it a shot.
Look at that. So we were able to now actually fully abstract. We put our login behavior now inside of the Hasura API, where we were no longer even needing to. And I'm curious if we were to try this, if we inspect this request again here from the Hasura interface, because it should show us that network request going out and coming back.
Yeah.
If it does, I'm curious what happens with the set, or we can even just check cookies here in the browser. I'm curious to see if it actually is passing cookies back to us.
Let's see that.
We can see if it set cookies here in the browser. I don't think it did, but. So if we look at the network request.
Is this kind of what? So it does pass back the set cookie.
And what is it setting as the host?
It just sets it as like the current the destination URL. So in our case, we'll set it to it basically set it to like wherever your query, wherever this is going, it's going to set it to this basically.
Okay. So what's kind of cool then is we could actually be able to get our cookie that you're setting from the header and actually set that as an HTTP cookie by persisting this behind the Hasura API. And then we wouldn't even have to mess around with JWTs. You would actually have your cookie set using this login mechanism.
So there's 2 points there. One is like to verify the access token. It's a little bit different than just verifying a JWT. So you're going to have to use like a verify session function. I'm not sure. Like, so I think Hasura has like custom auth functionality, right? Where you can sort of spin up you can run any JavaScript code or something in that to verify, do authentication.
Well, except for in this case, we've told Supertokens to do the verification, right? We just passed the request in. We took the form handling and we just said pass all the variables over to Supertokens. The same thing that our front end did. We've just, instead of going this way, we've told it to now just go directly through Hasura to Supertokens. And then we turn all that payload right back. But now I have the benefit of I'm shipping one API to my user, and I'm getting the cookie as well now from the trusted host. And so they're able to talk across inside of a single domain. They're not having to talk across, or they wouldn't be able to talk across domain. But that's a pretty cool flow there, where then we can actually just abstract away a lot of our code and just say now everything is inside of the Hasura API and being able to use Supertokens to do all of that.
Yeah, but my question was a little bit different. It was like so after this, right, the front end is going to query Hasura. So the way the front end code will change, like for example, this button, it won't need this anymore, right? And it won't need this anymore, because it's going to query this domain and the browser is going to attach the cookies.
The cookie automatically.
Exactly. Now Hasura will have to verify the access token. How is it going to do that?
Well, because it's going to still get. So what I would do now is I would tell Hasura to look for cookie-based auth. And
Right.
when you set the JWT payload, you can tell it to look for cookie-based auth, and you would tell it the name of the cookie that it's looking for.
Right.
And then so it would just look for the cookie that you're setting in the return request. Because the cookie here, it's setting it called what? It's called
S access token and like
yeah.
S refresh token. So the thing is, this token is the access token is different from the JWT that we saw earlier, and it's not really a JWT. It's sort of a signed cookie, so it requires our SDK to verify it. So is there like a way that you can actually run that verification code within Hasura through like a custom?
You could do a webhook handler for authentication. So basically, when you log in, it just calls the webhook first to verify that it's trusted, then it goes back. So
yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. So using the webhook, you can sort of verify this access token using our SDK. Like the way the SDK sort of, if you want to, like we have this function. So let's assume that this was the Hasura backend, because now the cookies are going to go to the Hasura backend. So you will like, let's say you have an API / whatever, you can actually use like our verify session function for that. I think I need to import it. Yeah, so this function would essentially help with verification of, and then you have your request and response and your logic here. So this function is needed to verify this access token.
Okay.
If this access token is going to get sent to Hasura requests, then we need to somehow run this function inside the custom web auth hook, in Hasura, which will, and then sort of the request object will contain stuff like the user ID. So request of session dot get user ID, that's kind of the API that we have here. And then you would pass this user ID. The auth hook, I assume, would return this user ID, and then your sort of permissions would use that to query the database. Is that sort of correct?
Yeah. So you have the sign in that goes through, gets back the signed cookie, and then every subsequent request you make to Hasura is calling the webhook to on the request. So it gets to Hasura, and then it's checking the actual signed cookie. Yep, this cookie checks out, and then it continues on through the rest of the way to Hasura. But again, still all persistent behind the one API endpoint, which is just super dope. Because then you can do any front end. You don't need any kind of an SDK or any kind of special wrappers. It's part of your API. This is your login API with Supertokens.
Yeah, and you won't have the security issue as well of exposing the JWT or anything.
Exactly.
Just using HTTP only cookies throughout. So that's pretty awesome. Yeah.
So it sounds like I need to have you back on soon, so we can talk about creating this solution. Another thing I want to just kind of surface here for the community, for those that stuck out with us here at the very end, we have the Hasura.io data hub. This is a really interesting place where we can surface all kinds of cool integrations like what we just talked about or we even showed tonight. So even if anybody in the community wants to try and undertake that as an example, Hasura demo, and submit that, we have all kinds of swag and stuff to give away. So that'd be kind of cool if anybody wanted to try submitting a Supertokens integration to the data hub. It would be kind of fun. But
the only other thing that sort of like is missing from this whole setup is that we had to create the mutation for login, like the types and stuff manually. And the middleware just like login is just one of the functions, but there are like a couple of other APIs like sign out and sign up and reset password and all of those things which it exposes. So maybe if there's like a way of proxying the request automatically through without the user having to define the types themselves, that would be awesome. I'm not sure if that's Is that
Yeah,
what you
that would be probably by checking the name. You could call the same endpoint. You call the same endpoint, and it passes along the action name.
Mm-hmm.
And so then at the express endpoint, you could then just switch behavior about what it is you're wanting to do. So you could say, if I'm coming in as a login, run this middleware flow. If I'm coming in as a sign out, run this middleware flow.
Yeah.
That could
But
be one way. Yeah.
but the user would have to define the different. So you want the actions tab, right? They have to define different actions for each of the APIs that this middleware exposes,
Well,
right?
it could just be auth, right? It could just be an auth action. And
Uh-huh.
then whether it's getting a payload or not getting a payload is a little bit of a moot point.
Okay.
The payload that comes into Express includes the action handler payload. So it's saying, right now I'm trying to do a login behavior, and then the
Right.
login behavior saying, well, I sure hope you brought your credentials.
Right.
But if it's like a log out, it's like, well, I don't care if you brought credentials, I'm going to log you out now and just remove the cookie.
Mm-hmm.
So those, you could do that. I would argue that there's benefit to mapping out in the GraphQL space, because you get then those strongly typed APIs, so that if you're working with TypeScript or another type language, you're
Yeah.
able to work with it in that regard. But that's
Yeah.
sort of a implementation preference.
And like all the APIs that the middleware that the Express app here through our middleware exposes, you can find them over here on Swagger Hub. So like for the email password, so we just showcase like third-party email passwords. So
Oh,
this is the
fantastic.
one.
Yeah. Yeah.
This
Cool.
so yeah, this is like the slash auth. This is slash auth by default. So slash auth slash sign in. This is the one we saw right now. But it also exposes these other APIs, and like for sessions, it also has like the sign out and refresh API, which um, then you have to map all these APIs out as mutation. But
And this is the exact use case why internally I'm trying to champion the request to say, when we have those actions, point it to a Swagger definition and get the auto mapping, so you could just get all of those endpoints plus the types and the relationships between them, which would be freaking magic.
yeah, that would be
But
awesome.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's technically possible. So we're kind of thinking in these directions is where we're kind of wanting to go. But
Yeah. I mean, what would be like even easier is if there was a way of just setting up a reverse proxy on Hasura. That would just like at some path it would just send all requests to the Express app, and then you wouldn't have to worry about any of the mutations or anything. It just like mutation typings, it would just like go through and work.
yeah. Hey, I really appreciate you coming on to the show today. That was a lot of fun. It was good to see. I mean,
Right.
that's we love seeing wider support for different auth providers, because it's just one of the things that makes for very rich applications.
Yeah.
I wanted to see if we have any last things. Just somebody saying that Supertokens is really awesome. So I think we all saw that tonight. But yeah, thanks again for joining us. We'll have to have you on again soon when we can even look at some more advanced features of mapping Supertokens to Hasura APIs and stuff.
Yeah.
Really great. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jesse. It was great talking to you. I learned a bunch today. So thank you.
That's great. That's what this show is all about. I'm looking for the end stream button. There, I found it. So I'm going to go ahead and push it now. But everybody, have a very good rest of your day. We'll see you next Tuesday.